Welcome, everyone, to Deprogrammed on Unsafe Space, and happy Valentine's Day. I am your host, one of your hosts, Carter Laren, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, the bad Mama Jamma, Keri Smith. Keri?
Hi, Carter. Hi, guys. Carter's very sick today. I'm good. I'm so sorry I'm laughing.
I am.
Your face and the way you sound, I can tell how sick you are.
It's not my best day ever. I'm on enough Benadryl to kill a horse, and still kind of swollen and puffy. And I'm allergic to something. It might be the prevalence of social justice in our culture, which means I'm doomed, basically. So, yeah. So, Keri, we're going to talk about Valentine's Day. Oh, your dog has something already. This show is starting off exactly as I imagined it might go. and there goes Keri. Yeah, we wanted to talk about Valentine's Day. It's not actually something that I normally celebrate, so it's kind of weird for me to talk about it. I've always been I don't know why this happened. Probably I had some girlfriend at some point who had high expectations, and my response was just to not celebrate at all. But for as long as I can remember in my adult life, I've not celebrated Valentine's Day. I kind of view it as a way for Hallmark to make money, and you should appreciate your romantic partner every day of the year and celebrate special days. So I'm not really a Valentine's Day kind of guy. However, I don't think there's anything wrong with Valentine's Day, and I get why a lot of people want to celebrate it, and it is under attack in a way that makes me want to defend it now. Keri, what's your relationship to Valentine's Day?
Well, I'll celebrate it if I'm in a relationship with someone. You're the first person who told me that Valentine's Day is usually more centered around the woman, with the man buying the woman stuff, because I always assumed you both buy each other stuff. I don't know why.
You're such a good feminist.
I guess because I was a good feminist. Yeah. I think I told you the least romantic Valentine's Day gift I ever got my ex-husband was a paper shredder, but he needed one. But it wasn't like about me. It was about us. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I would appreciate a paper shredder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't have this. Yeah, it's about consumerism, totally. But a lot of stuff in our culture is, and a lot of other holidays are. Christmas has become about consumerism.
Right. But it doesn't mean you don't celebrate it. But
right. And what's funny is, out of all the holidays, so SJWs, yeah, they definitely, it seems like a lot of them are very miserable all year, but especially on holidays. That's why you see all these opinion pieces about why different holidays are problematic, and how to have, they don't call it this, but essentially how to have the worst Thanksgiving dinner ever. They're always, there's like why you shouldn't celebrate the 4th of July. Like there's always, doesn't matter what the holiday is.
Well, that one's obvious because it's all about America. So,
yeah. They just don't like fun. And so I think out of all of them, Valentine's Day, they seem to be the least, there seem to be the least amount of articles condemning it, but there are some out there. Like there's one I pulled up on Bustle about 8 reasons why Valentine's Day is a toxic holiday.
That's a good one.
Yeah, they definitely do go after it.
By the way, Keith is telling us, by the way, anyone in chat, which right now is Keith for all I can tell, maybe there's some other people.
Hi, Keith.
Feel free to give us direction today. It's a struggle. Keith once got his wife a gas grill for Valentine's Day.
Look at that.
I think that's a pretty awesome present, Keith. And knowing Grace, I bet she appreciated it. So, yeah, I think it is mostly a thing where guys do stuff for women, right? You don't hear guys say like, oh, she didn't really celebrate. Like, guys don't complain about how women celebrate Valentine's Day generally, but the reverse does happen, right? You see that in our culture. And I was telling you the other day, Keri, that actually years ago, I spent a lot of time in Tokyo, and I had a Japanese girlfriend, and she informed me that they also have something called White Day in Japan, and which is like, she said it was the reverse Valentine's Day, which was the women are supposed to do something nice for their guys, which was cool, I guess. But
They would
yeah.
feminists would definitely have a problem with that, I think.
Yes.
First of all, it's heteronormative.
Yes. So let's just for context, Valentine's Day, I looked it up just because I was curious. It traces its origins back to Lupercalia, a Roman festival dedicated to fertility. And then the celebrations of that day faded with the growth of Christianity until it was revived in 496 AD, and a feast for Saint Valentine.
Really? So, because Bustle doesn't include any of that in their history about Valentine's Day. This is what they say. They say it's patriarchal. Quote, if you've never explored the historical context behind Valentine's Day, get ready to be horrified. It's actually part of patriarchal conditioning that permeates our culture. Quote, it is mainly about fertility and the promise of offspring, which secures the society and the city-state. Vasiliki Kotini, assistant professor of English and comparative literature, told the American University in Cairo, quote, this is because offspring means citizens, and in the case of male offspring, it means soldiers. It also means continuity of the family name and familial wealth that we passed on to the new generation. If there were ever a reason to shun Valentine's Day, this is the best one I've ever heard. And then it goes on about how you should just celebrate.
That it's about fertility? That's the reason?
That supposedly is patriarchal. So
having kids is patriarchal?
Yeah.
Yeah. I read some, we can get into this if we need to later, but I read an article. Let me look up the title of this article. It was from the 70s, but this is this craziness does actually exist. And so this was called Lesbians in the Class Position of Women by Margaret Small. I think it was in 1975. But she has a whole thing about how Marxists don't get it because they don't understand that they don't understand the plight of women. And her view was, she says, in classical Marxist terms, the relationship of wife to husband is one of slavery. In terms of the oppression of women, heterosexuality is the ideology of male supremacy. And she has this entire argument, which I find fascinating for its inanity, if that's a word. Her argument is because women have children, women are ultimately the producers of everything. And so anything, she states she makes some wild claims without any supporting evidence. Like she says, her legitimate view of the evolution of the species is that guys were because guys weren't tied down by childbirth, they were out doing whatever, just, hanging out. And women invented agriculture, invented everything, took care of kids, built all the surplus, got all the food, did everything. And the guys would wander back to the homestead once in a while, steal the surplus and go trade it with other guys from other who had also stolen the surplus from their enslaved women. It's a fascinatingly demented read. But
there are a lot of female chauvinists out there. We only ever hear about male chauvinists, but there are a lot of female chauvinists. Yes.
Tamara, we're going to get, I do want to talk about Valentine's Day in school. So thank you for bringing it up. Tamara brought this up. And Keith is telling us, I didn't read this part about Valentine's Day, Keith, but it's good to say. He says Saint Valentine was arrested for marrying couples during a period when marriage was banned because too many young men were chasing women rather than joining the army. He was sentenced to clubbing death. But the second part that you're writing, Keith, is not true. So there's a myth that says on the day he was sentenced, he signed a letter, "Your Valentine," to a girl who befriended him. Apparently that's a myth, at least what I heard. But anyway, regardless, it doesn't really matter what the origin is. The recent origin is Hallmark wants you to buy cards, and Godiva wants you to buy chocolate, and thus we have Valentine's Day. But so I looked up, in prep for this, I did look up some of the complaints about Valentine's Day, and I I just want to point out some. I think it's funny, you know. I don't mind. There's going to be crazy articles by people about, like you said, the Bustle article, and there's actually a blog that's My Feminist Valentines from a couple years ago, which I can talk about in a minute. But in the classical quality and style of mainstream media, CNN's article was why flowers get so expensive on Valentine's Day. And I guess if you're a regular CNN listener, this is baffling to you because you've never heard about the law of supply and demand. And so an entire article needs to be written about why flowers are expensive on Valentine's Day, which I find pretty amusing. But okay, so we should just go over what some of the complaints against Valentine's Day are, because at the core, they're actually complaints about love, and heterosexual love in particular, long-term committed love. That's kind of the reason people are social justice type people are upset about Valentine's Day. So, one place that I started was someone is by an anonymous feminist, of course, because she doesn't want to admit that this is her. But a couple years ago, 2017, she writes, My Feminist Valentines. And it's really interesting because, or at least it's interesting to me, she says, let me quote this here. She basically is saying, I know Valentine's Day is a consumerist holiday personified by patriarchal and heteronormative traditions, which reinforces sexist stereotypes. And I'm a strong, independent woman who doesn't need a man, right? But she describes herself and what she's doing and she kind of goes into how women are exploited and blah, blah, blah. But her first sentence is, as I write this article, I realize that I'm a textbook cliche. I'm sitting alone at home watching Netflix with a bar of chocolate and swiping my way through Tinder, one squatting with induced animals whilst traveling picture at a time, crying, nay weeping, whilst on my period.
That's sad.
That's why she doesn't like Valentine's Day. I don't think you need to read the rest of the article there. Keri, what did you find out from Bustle? What are the big? I've got some notes here about what people don't like about Valentine's Day, but what do you find? What'd you find? What's Bustle say?
Well, not just Bustle, everydayfeminism.com, which is the worst site. And for people who visit it the first time, they usually think it's satire, and it's not. It's really horrible. They're currently offering these $500 weekend seminars that you can go to where you learn how to heal from your internalized toxic whiteness. And that's a real thing that you can pay money to do. But anyway, on everydayfeminism.com, they had some stuff about how they have a problem with it being heteronormative. They say it perpetuates the idea that certain kinds of relationships are more normal and more natural and desirable than others. Specifically, it means that Valentine's Day celebrations focus on heterosexual, monogamous romantic relationships. See, they don't, anything that's not traditional, as you and I have talked about before, they kind of despise it, or anything that is traditional, anything that's traditional. So of course they don't approve of monogamy.
Yeah, can we pause on this for a minute? Because I have a theory. I'm gonna do the most romantic thing possible and relate love to economics. But there's this economic fallacy that happens on the left quite a lot, and it's this zero-sum mentality. It's this idea that, like, if I make $1 billion, that's $1 billion that you didn't get, right? So I think I've quoted this before, but there's I'll bastardize this quote from PJ O'Rourke, something about, the economy is a pizza, and if I have too many slices, you're left with nothing but a Domino's box to feed your family. That's the fallacy. And, inherently money, I get, put the fiat currency crap and government controlled currency aside for just a moment. At its essence, theoretically, money is a representation of productive activity. It's you did something that someone else was willing to exchange their productive activity for. Either you made a movie or you baked a biscuit or whatever you did. Someone found value out of it and they voluntarily exchanged and their labor with yours. And money is not zero sum. So you can actually produce. And so Bill Gates getting $1 billion doesn't take $1 billion away from anyone else. In fact, it helps us because that $1 billion represents voluntary payments to him for providing value to our lives, right? Maybe a better example is the iPhone, right? But the iPhone's worth more than $800 to you, so you hand over $800 to Apple. And it's worth less than $800 to Apple, so they take the $800 instead of the iPhone. It's a voluntary win-win exchange, and value is being created through the production and sale of an iPhone. It's not a zero-sum game, and that's not how the economy works. That's not how production works. It's just that's not how things work. It's not zero-sum. I think that this zero-sum mentality doesn't just apply on the left to economics. I think it applies to attention, like emotional currency, attention, appreciation, love. It applies to all of this stuff. And so, and what got me thinking about this was, Tamara mentioned that schools are slowly, she says Valentine's Day is being turned into We Love Our Friends Day in schools. Schools, I read some articles about schools not liking Valentine's Day. And the reason is they didn't like this idea that there's inherently discrimination in giving Valentine's Day. I don't mean discrimination in the, racist or, negative the negative meaning of the word, but I mean
discrimination, like picking.
I'm discriminating, right? Like, right. I like you, but not you. Like there's some, I'm conferring my affection on one person rather than another. And the schools worry that, some of the ones who don't get the affection, their feelings are hurt and that kind of thing. But I think the left, so let's just tie this back to kind of the heteronormative complaints, the complaints of heteronormativity. Just actually, does everyone know what the word heteronormative means? It means a focus on making heterosexuality normal, right? Or the assumption that heterosexuality is normal. So the focus of heteronormativity means you're not focusing on anything that's not heterosexual or anyone who's not heteronormative. And there are other ways to be sexually and other ways to have relationships and other ways to love and blah, blah, blah. And they seem to be acting like if the world celebrates Valentine's Day and two people who are in a loving, committed relationship celebrate Valentine's Day, or there's this public recognition that a committed heterosexual relationship and a romantic relationship was worth celebrating, that somehow that kind of emotional currency that's granted to those couples somehow detracts from appreciation or emotional currency for you. And so they literally use words like, well, it erases my existence, right? When you do this thing to celebrate heterosexual relationship, it erases the gay relationship or the whatever relationship. And it's this fallacy. It's this idea that like, just because we're celebrating one thing that a lot of people maybe relate to, that doesn't mean that it's harming what's not being celebrated on that day. I guess that was a long way of saying it, but
no, they do that. They use that erasure language with other things too. But I have different opinion about heteronormativity now than I did when I was in SJW. Because
tell me.
Well, heteronormativity is the idea that heterosexuality is the norm, and I used to agree that was, quote, problematic because there are other sexualities. But now I realize it is the norm. Like I'm not saying that everything should exclude, clearly we shouldn't exclude gay couples. But if you look at percentage-wise, on average, there's a reason why most of the couples that you see reflected in media, because I was part of classes that would critique the media and say, oh, TV shows are so heteronormative. And they rightly applauded when we started seeing more gay characters. But now I feel like they're tilting it to such a degree that they want to see more representations than are actually statistically accurate, not just for gay couples, but for people of color as well. Like it's reached this point. It's like, it's not just, we don't want to see an accurate representation. We want to see 50-50. I'm like, but that's not the norm. So
Right.
I don't know if I'm making sense, but I'm kind of like, yeah, there's a reason why most of what you see reflected in mainstream media is heterosexual couples, because that is the norm. So
yeah, and there's this weird reaction to the word abnormal, which I think is an unhealthy reaction. The word abnormal just means not normal, and normal
Right.
doesn't mean good. Normal
Right.
normal might be bad. Maybe people normally overconsume and have excess credit card debt. That's
Exactly.
normal. Being
You know,
abnormal is good.
what they do, Carter, is they ascribe superiority to these things. So if you say abnormal or not average, they hear inferior. And or any
Right.
type of difference, they hear inferior and superior. That's not true. Something
Right.
can be not the norm and not be inferior, and
It
vice
could be
versa.
superior.
Yeah, it could be. And like you pointed out, you could something
Stephen
that's
Hawking's had an abnormal IQ,
yeah,
abnormally high. Right, that's fine.
right.
Yeah. But yeah, so they've got this view that abnormal is bad, and then or that when we say abnormal we mean bad, and that's not what we mean. So again, to your point, Keri, yes, society is heteronormative, and that's correct.
Yeah, that's kind of the way
Heterosexuality is normal.
that's kind of the way I view it now. And I didn't view, because what they teach you is that that's wrong to view, that we should be viewing, just like with the trans issue now, you see, we are now forcing, kindergartners to grapple with whether or not they're trans. Kindergartners shouldn't have to be grappling with that. It's like a 0.00% of the population has to grapple with that. But now we're treating that as the norm because they view it as cis-norm. They have a new word, cis-normative. Cis-normative right. is when we assume that, so cis, just CIS, if you guys haven't seen this, cis is what they call you in opposition to trans, meaning they would call me a cis woman because I'm a biological woman and I also identify as a woman. I refuse to call myself cis. I'm like, I'm not going to define myself in relation to a very tiny statistical percentage of the population. But that's what they're forcing. It's about control.
Yeah.
And they're
why
forcing,
they started saying cisgender instead of just
I'm not a woman, I'm a cis woman. But yeah, right. So just to finish my point on cis normativity, it's like they view it as cis normative, not to force little children to figure out if they're cis or trans. And so you're forcing kids to grapple with a question that shouldn't be a question for almost like over 99% of the population. And so now you have kids that are haven't even taken biology classes yet, that are being told that their gender identity and their biological sex and their sexual orientation can all vary independently. And that's, I don't know, I think that's insane. So I mean, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent, but cis normativity, guys.
No. Yeah, no, you're right. And Tamara points out that this is intentional because they're trying to normalize things that are not normal. And not normal doesn't mean bad. Neither Keri or I have anything against people who aren't heterosexual. And I think probably there are a lot of people who aren't gay and aren't heterosexual and maybe identify on some spectrum and feel oppressed still. Like, we're not arguing that there's not oppression. But we are arguing that being heterosexual, at least mostly heterosexual, is quite normal. Like, mostly heterosexual and monogamous is quite normal.
And I'm also arguing that there's nothing wrong with presenting the norm as the norm. Like, they don't want the norm to be presented as the norm. They want a recreation of reality.
Right. So, case in point, let's there's a Bustle article. Let me pull this Bustle article up. By the way, for those of you who are just joining, I know a couple people just joined. We're kind of taking it slow and relaxed today. Happy to get suggestions from from the comments.
If you're just joining, Carter's sick.
I'm sick. Yeah, I'm sick, and not just mentally.
And I figure, you guys, this is more like a lackadaisical show. This is more like our Christmas special. We'll just have it be our Valentine's Day special. Oh, by the way, feminists love to say they're trying to recenter Valentine's Day around loving and supporting women. And a lot of my feminist friends really loved Leslie Knope's character on Parks and Rec when she declared Valentine's Day to be Galentines Day, GAL. Like a day when you celebrate women. And so a lot of my friends steadfastly on Valentine's Day, they choose to instead wish each other a happy Galentine's Day. There's nothing wrong with that. I just think it's interesting.
Well, actually, Keri, I don't know if you are aware of this, but Galentine's Day is now under attack by the social. You're behind on your social justice culture. I was looking Galentine's Day. They don't like Galentine's Day because.
Wait, is it cisnormative?
No, it was. You know what? Hold on. I can actually find it. Let me find the article. Galentine's Day is sexist, they say, and patronizing. She doesn't need. So Rachel Hosey, I guess is how you say her name. She says she writes about why she doesn't need a separate holiday for her singlehood. And she certainly doesn't need pity that goes with Galentine's Day because it stems from oppressive notions of traditional gender roles and expectations. So
look, here's what's funny about this, Carter. They're miserable. So they criticize Valentine's Day. So then they create a new holiday to try and be like, hey, let's have a reason not to be miserable. And then they get miserable and criticize Galentine's Day.
I know.
I refuse to be happy.
I know. So here's an article from Bustle by Anna Goshua. And this gets back to this making things normal or not normal. She rails against, she writes, what Valentine's Day means when you're asexual and aromantic. And again, so now her problem is basically that we are viewing being sexual and romantic as normal somehow. We're normalizing being sexual and romantic. So she says, so this is another really interesting one. She talks about how she liked Valentine's Day when she was younger, and like they just kind of at school they just passed out Valentines to everyone, right? Mm-hmm. But then when it became about selection, she writes, you know, when suddenly you like when you have to maybe pick someone, right, and you don't just hand it out to everyone. She writes, suddenly the idea of walking up to a friend, especially a male one, and handing them a Valentine's Day card seemed nothing short of mortifying. Years before I'd ever heard of the terms aromantic and asexual, let alone identified with them, I realized that Valentine's Day represented something that I seemingly couldn't understand or be a part of. Now, this to me is fascinating because she describes herself as aromantic and asexual. But if she were aromantic and asexual, there would be nothing mortifying about handing a male a Valentine's on Valentine's Day.
That's a great point.
The reason that it causes her emotional stress is because she's a sexual and romantic creature. That's why she's stressed about it. And it was fascinating to me to see that she didn't make that connection. It's literally the next sentence, right? She says like, oh, I had a lot of anxiety about the idea of walking up to a guy and handing him a Valentine's Day card. And basically the next sentence was like, that's because I didn't realize that I'm asexual and aromantic. Like, you know, I don't like armchair psychologizing people I don't know, but it sounds like you're not aromantic and asexual. Because if you were, handing Valentine's Day cards
wouldn't be an issue.
Guys you like wouldn't be a big deal. So then she says, although Valentine's Day may seem like a trivial holiday, it's far from the only time that a social emphasis on romantic and sexual relationship contributes to a sense of alienation among aromantic and asexual people who don't experience romantic or sexual attraction, respectively. So by the way, she just did define those terms in case you don't know. They're people who don't experience romantic or sexual attraction, but apparently freak out at the idea of handing someone a Valentine's. So she's, again, this is back to what we're talking about, Keri. Her criticism is that it's normalizing, is quote, quote, creating an emphasis. It's like your celebration of love makes me feel alienated. That's basically the argument, right?
Well, it's being annoyed by other. It reminds me of what we talked about with SJWs who get triggered by people talking about exercising or going to the gym, and they're like, I don't want to hear about your exercise because you're fat shaming me. It's like, no, it's not about you. They view everything as being about them. So if this woman sounds like she's sort of everyone else's romantic love that she sees around her is somehow a condemnation of her, and it's not.
Yeah, and they use the language, right? So, sex educator Kenna Cook tells Bustle again. It's Bustle. Quote, being aromantic or asexual tends to be portrayed as an extreme option, like being a nun or a spinster. Aromantic and asexual folks often have their valid identities completely erased. I don't know. It is this weird. That's why I kind of relate this back to the zero-sum idea of economics. It's like if you tell Keri that you like her, just haven't said that you like them, right? Like it's a world where you can't actually have any preference for anything.
No.
Expressing preference hurts everyone who doesn't get the preference expressed for them. Although that's also problematic, which we can talk about in a minute.
You're freezing up, just so you know. I think I can still hear you, but the video has you totally frozen.
Well, as long as you can hear me.
Okay, good. Good. I can see you again.
You don't have to look at my swollen face. So
you're sick. Hearing
me is fine.
Okay.
But they yeah, so it's this idea that your identity is erased simply because someone prefers someone else. Mm-hmm. But then the flip side of that is it's also considered, we talked about this last week, unwanted solicitation is also bad, mm-hmm. right? And is viewed as harassment. So let's just play a scenario out here. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, that there's someone out there in our community who has a crush on Keri. I'm going to use you as an example because you're single, Keri. They, by expressing any interest in Keri, first of all, they're sexually harassing her if it's unwanted, which they won't know until she responds. So they're risking sexually harassing and being an oppressor. And they've now erased and oppressed everyone who's not Keri, who they didn't express interest to. I think that about sums up the social justice outlook on expressing affection.
I think you're right. So, can I ask you if we can talk about something?
No, you can just talk about it.
Okay, let's talk about it.
This is not the patriarchal oppression podcast.
Right.
See, Keri?
Yeah, perfect.
We're equals.
So I was having a discussion with some women last night who are Christian, who were asking me about, to go back to the Everyday Feminism website and how terrible they are. They have this conference about unlearning your toxic whiteness or what have you. And they have a lot of crazy conferences. Like if you look through all the seminars, they're advertising. It's SJW boot camp. Or as what was I calling it? So a friend said it's a gulag, and I said, yeah, it's an emotional labor camp. But they, I just love the idea, because you go there to basically be shamed about all of your privileges. But so they have this one class about like
it sounds kind of like kinky, by the way. It sounds like something that if they just made it sexual would be a fetish. And maybe it is a fetish.
Oh, well, there are some on, not to get too far afield, but there's a website. There's a secret Facebook group called White Guilt Trading Post where white people are based. It's like a fetish. They pay money to people of color who demand money. And then there was one woman in there, a black woman in there, who calls the white guy's piggy, like give me money, piggy. That seems very sexualized and like fetishized to me. It's very creepy, like a money kind of domination scenario. But so to go back to these classes, they have one about ethical non-monogamy, like open relationships. And so some of the women I was talking to last night were like asking me sort of, is this common? And I think at least anecdotally, it's become more common. I know people who practice this or who claim to. I used to work with someone who was in an open relationship, but it wasn't really open because she was still lying about and like hiding relationships, which is weird. It's like if you're in an open one, why hide it? But you know more about this, like the open relationship stuff and the ethical non-monogamy, and I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. Let's see.
About love here specifically. Let me give you a starting point. The idea that there's a book called The Ethical Slut, right? That a lot of people I've read, a lot of my friends have read, and it was a very popular book. And one idea that they have, one of the ideas behind non-monogamy is that there's an abundance of love and you can never have too much love and you can express love with multiple people.
So yeah, I've talked about this a little bit on the show, but this might be TMI for some people, but Keri asked, so blame her. Yeah, so actually The Ethical Slut is a horrible book. It's just stupid. It's just sophomoric and dumb. And I say that as someone who spent years in a polyamorous relationship. Dossie Eaton, who was the author of that book, was my therapist. So for a little while. So like, it is a piece of shit. Oh, I'm trying not to swear so much. By the way, stop me from swearing. We're trying to make these a little bit more kid-friendly, Keri. So go ahead and smack me upside the head virtually. But Dossie Eaton, the book itself, it was sophomoric and dumb. It was like, it's stuff like, I don't remember if this is in the book or if she's something that she told me, but it's like, oh, do you feel jealousy? Why don't you put your pajamas in the dryer while your spouse is out with someone else and then put them on because they'll be warm and fuzzy and it will make you feel better. It's like, what kind of, did you even graduate junior high school? What kind of advice? How stupid. The advice is just, it's a horrible book. Even if you want to practice non-monogamy, it's a stupid, stupid book. And the only reason that people like it is the name sounds interesting and risque. And a lot of people don't have any other resources to turn to, so they open that book. So my views on polyamory. I also went through a time in my life where I followed that logic, and I said, well, love is boundless. You can have lots of love. Just because you love one person doesn't mean you don't love another person, and you can love more than one person in that. That kind of sounds like it might make sense, even for Christians, where there's this like, well, obviously God has endless love, right? Granted, I'm an atheist, but I'll use the Christian language, right? God's got endless love for all of his children, and so clearly this concept is valid, and a lot of the arguments for it were similar to the arguments that I just made, actually, about the zero-sum game. Remember, I criticized and said, like, look, the economy is not a zero-sum game, blah, blah, blah. So oddly enough, a lot of these people who think that the economy is a zero-sum game, on the flip side, say, well, love's not a zero-sum game. You don't get it. Just because you love someone doesn't mean you're not loving someone else. And I think, so just to kind of set the stage here, I am no longer polyamorous. I don't think it works for me, at least. And I think there are some real problems with it that people don't talk about. And I think it really comes down to what you mean by the definition of the word love. And if you mean a adolescent hormone-induced definition of love, then that logic works perfectly well. And you can love as many people as you want.
Like an emotion or limerence, right?
It feels like a thing, like limerence. So people who don't know the word limerence is that, when you first get into a relationship, it's very exciting and it lasts, between 6 and 18 months typically, and then kind of dies down and then you kind of get into your quote ruts and you're in your more mature phase of your relationship. That beginning phase is called limerence, and it's basically impossible to get back with a particular person because it's about newness. Part of this feeling is about newness and discovery. And so once you're in a relationship with someone after a while, it's hard to rekindle that newness because you know the person very well, which is good. You want a secure, known entity to settle down and have children with or whatever. Anyway, if you have this sophomoric or kind of adolescent view of love as love is the thing that makes me feel bubbly, right? Then you can have that attitude. But the truth is, in the real world, it may be true that your hormones are, quote, unlimited and your feelings are, quote, unlimited. But unlike God, and again, I'm going to use God as a metaphor here. Unlike God, your time is not unlimited. Your resources are not unlimited. Your attention is not unlimited. And if you view love in a more mature way, and you view love as not just giddy feelings, but as a conscious commitment and deep respect for and support of another individual, then you very quickly come to the conclusion that because there's so many hours in a day, if you spend an hour supporting this one person, it is a zero-sum game. You're not spending that hour supporting this other person. You don't have unlimited hours and unlimited time. You also don't have unlimited emotional energy. So I think the decision to be polyamorous is a decision to limit the depth of commitment from a, I don't mean it in like a, when I say that, people are like, oh, it's not limiting the depth of commitment. I'm still going to commit and be with this person forever. I mean, you're actually limiting the amount of intimacy that you can have with that other person. And maybe you can get very intimate, but
you're always holding a part of yourself back, though. I mean, there's always a part of you.
Even if you're not holding a part of yourself back consciously, you are if there's someone else that you're also doing that with, that you're also being emotionally supportive of, or you're also being there for and spending time with, that is by definition taking away from time and attention and energy you're spending with the other person. And so maybe you get to a certain level of depth before you're 98 and keel over, but you maybe would have gotten to twice that level of depth if you hadn't spread it around.
Well, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I do think there's a part of yourself being held back because you're necessarily creating romantic intimacy with another person that your primary partner is not a part of. And we may not agree on that, but I think that is, I'm of the opinion that that's a part of you that they're not getting to experience. And one other quick thing you said that makes me think of is, love is not, like we're saying, love is not just a feeling, it's an action, like it's behaviors. And so, like you said, you have limited time, you have limited actions and behaviors. And if you're acting and behaving away from that one person, you're behaving with another person, you're loving this other person in that time. It is something that you're parsing up. It is a pie that you're cutting into pieces and you're divvying up. And so I think it makes me think of a friend invited me to hear this guy speak. I'm blanking on his name. He's a Christian, he's a theologian, but he did a whole lecture about St. Augustine. And he was framing it around the idea of like freedom from versus freedom to. And how our culture and our society teaches us that freedom is freedom from, like always running from things, like hitting the open road, like, getting outside of boundaries, no limitations. And the problem with that, and you can see this in St. Augustine's life, is he was such a hedonist, and he pursued everything, and drink and sex, and, you continually push the boundaries. But this guy would argue, and I would argue, that when you do that, you're always escalating because it's never fulfilling. Your freedom from is not enough because you have to just keep going and going and going. And what's actually kind of revolutionary to discover is that freedom too, like if you actually have structure and boundaries, that then you have a lot of freedom within that structure and boundaries, that it's a different kind of freedom that you don't have when there are no boundaries. So think of it like this, like an artist, they have boundaries, they learn technique, they spend a lot of time learning the structure and the boundaries. And then once they get that down, they have the freedom to be incredible, to create incredibly beautiful works because they've spent that time within the framework, if that makes sense. And so I think the same thing about love.
It's like the thing with like writing, for example, Keri, right? If you give someone, it's harder to start with a blank page and no direction than it is if I say, write about a Martian named Bob that's from Mars and really likes green cheese. Like, okay, that's like, I've constrained you quite a lot, but you're more likely to come up with some interesting ideas there than you know.
Right. Like
blank piece of paper, go.
Exactly. Like look at art. If you don't have that structure and you don't have, that's what postmodern art is. It's a bunch of crap because you've got people who are just, throwing dung onto a sheet and saying that that's art because they're not working within any framework. And I think I've come to believe this, at least at this point in my life, the same thing about relationships is that if you have that boundary, that there's a lot more freedom too within that to explore and to get more deep and intimate and all these things that you wouldn't experience when you're spreading yourself so thin and you're trying to juggle all these different things.
I want to be careful about what I'm saying though, because I'm not actually telling people they shouldn't be in polyamorous relationships if they want to be. I think that it's just recently culture has become our culture has become excited about stuff like swinging and polyamory and all this other stuff without really, I think, taking a serious look at the consequences and the downsides. And you just have to go in knowing what they are. And can we just clarify some terms? Because I think some people, I was in this community for a while, so I take for granted that people understand terms, but I think it's important because someone just mentioned, Laura just mentioned she had a client that was a swinger once. And you mentioned something about your partner not being there or whatever. There are different styles of, quote, open relationships, right? There's polyamory where that's what I talked about at the beginning, where you're, quote, spreading love or whatever, you're loving different people. And I talked about why I think, that's hard to do given the constraints of reality. I guess maybe in a world where, I guess if you were a trust fund baby and had nothing else to do with your entire time, and you found two people, each of whom had a career that they were very dedicated to, and one worked days and the other worked nights, like, I don't know, maybe you could work it out, and no time that you spent with one person would detract from time you spent with another person. I don't know. I'm not saying it's not possible, but just I'm saying you need to understand what the costs are and how and what what it does take to do it. So that's like polyamory. But then there's things like open relationships where open relationships is often a more broad term. Polyamory is maybe a type of open relationship, but you can have relationships where like
you have certain
sexual
rules.
Flings are allowed, but and often when those relationships work, they have very well-defined rules, and those rules are followed. And in fact, the only way I've seen them work is if there are well-defined rules and the rules are religiously followed, and there's never deceit. And so there's a difference between having an affair and being in an open relationship and having sex with someone, right? Being in an open relationship and having sex does not involve deceit, right? If you're following your rules, presumably. And that actually is quite different than an affair. So be careful not to put those together. In the swinging community, often, like I said, Laura said to her client, she had a client who was a swinger. Swingers often, their partner is present for the sexual activity. And they view it as like some bonding thing as a couple. That's like, I'm not here to tell anyone what to do or not to do on any of those things. But, just to circle this back to love, which is, we're talking about Valentine's Day and love. We're not talking, this isn't, orgy day. This is Valentine's Day. So we're talking about love, not sex. And, to circle it back, I think you need to have a pretty immature view of love to think that love is just these feelings, just these bubbly feelings, just this limerence, and therefore there's zero consequences to polyamory in terms of how deeply and intimately you can love. And I don't think the left is very keen on making it clear what those trade-offs are, because, and we can get into this, I think one of their goals is to destroy the family and destroy monogamous and even semi-monogamous heterosexual relationships.
Right. Whatever. I'm not condemning these things. I'm just expressing my personal opinion. People can do what they want. This is just what I've learned at where I'm at in my life right now. So
yeah.
So, but I do think there is in the bubble that I was in the SJW echo chamber I was in, there is kind of a denigration of the kind of smirk at heterosexual monogamy. There are a lot of opinion pieces and things that have come out in the past few years about, my husband and my boyfriend, like articles where people are kind of flaunting that they're in open relationships. And, there's also, again, not to say they're not the same, but I know in my experience, I know people who were in open relationships who then were having affairs. So it's like they weren't following the rules. They were hiding things. And so, and there's also this justification. Oh, no.
You cut out, I think.
I know. Sorry, I have to get the doggy.
That's fine. You go get the dog. I guess I don't know. I don't know if I should wait for you to get back, Keri, before I make this point. But oh wait, you're back. Okay, never mind. I'll just let Keri continue.
No, I'm sorry. My dog's he's determined to be a part of this podcast today. He heard that we were doing a lackadaisical holiday special, and he's like, I want to be in that. So
yeah, it's cool.
Tiger.
That's cool.
I guess my point was just that there seem to be no boundaries in a lot of my social circles. Like it seems to be this attitude of, and maybe this was just in the entertainment industry. I don't know. But this kind of, you do you and you take care of you, like this kind of attitude, and anything that's traditional kind of being frowned on. And so,
yeah. So the thing that I think is not talked about is, one of the main reasons. So let's say if you're not going to have children at all, I think that it's, there are reasons to be in a long-term committed relationship, of course, but the reasons are much less important. And I think, I'll say this as someone who did get divorced, and really, I think I got divorced mistakenly, in the sense that, not that I don't love my wife now and have a happy life, but I think at the time, the people around me discounted the effect it would have on my child, and I did as well. I mean, I'm to blame, but I asked for advice and I talked about it. One thing that people dismiss is the impact to children on some of these other relationship norms, we'll call them, or styles, not norms. Children do better in a two-parent family, like home, with both biological parents present. And that's really important to not ignore. And I think a lot of these people, I think, first of all, they're anti-kid.
That's a stat, by the way. If people don't know that, that's an actual stat. Kids do, on average. That doesn't mean you have to have, if you understand averages, but on average, kids do better in homes with both parents there, both biological parents there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, one of the reasons that we have this institution of marriage, or well, it won't even have to be state related. It can just be this idea that we pair bond long term, is to raise children. Human children take an awful lot of time to raise. Right? They're not like, you know, when a deer has a baby in like 2 or 3 days, the baby's up and running around and, you know, can go forage for itself. Right? Humans are not like that. We have a lot. There's a lot of resources that are invested in our children. And as a result, the stability of having both parents present is vital to raising a child. And so I think a lot of this, that if you read, you know, I read a couple articles on Bustle and a few other places about, you know, because it was Valentine's Day, they felt like it was time to tell us all the other kinds of relationships we could have and how they were all valid and blah, blah, blah. And that's fine. But one thing that's notably absent from most of the discussion is the effect on children. The assumption is that you don't have children. And these are all the things that you can do to fulfill yourself. But if you have children, this stuff matters, and the stability of relationship matters. And, you know, one person that I know conservatives tend to, or at least the conservatives that I've seen, tend to dislike this woman, but I think she's quite interesting and love her stuff. There's a therapist named Esther Perel who writes a book. She wrote a few different books, but one of them is called Mating in Captivity, and she talks about there is this inherent conflict between wanting. So if you look at your hierarchy of needs, people want both kind of stability and security on the one hand, but they also want kind of variety and newness and like risk on the other hand. And learning how to balance that in a relationship is quite difficult, because part of that limerence that we talked about is that kind of newness and variety. Mm-hmm. But you don't, you know, we do ask our spouses, and this is not an easy task, and I'm not saying it's easy, but we do ask our spouses to be, on the one hand, I want you to be completely predictable and my solid rock, and I know everything is going to be fine with you, and I feel very stable and assured, and there's no surprises. That's what I want. Also, I want you to be new and surprise me and be unpredictable and risky, like, because that's exciting. Like, you can't be both of those things, and it's very difficult. So, you know, I think the truth of the matter is humans aren't only semi-monogamous. There's a huge rate of infidelity. And I think you could chalk that up to, you know, whatever you want, but it's not a new phenomenon. You could say, well, this is recent or whatever, but infidelity is not a new phenomenon. And so I think the human sexuality is quite
in the
complex.
Bible.
And yeah. And so I think it's a topic that's worth exploring, probably not on this podcast today, but it is a topic that's worth exploring, because it's not straightforward that, like, oh, just be in a monogamous relationship for the rest of your life, and you know, all you have to do is buy some sex toys and you'll be happy, right? You know, dress up once in a while in the bedroom and you know, you'll find your love life fulfilled. Like, that's not necessarily true. There are psychological drives and emotional drives that make it difficult, and it's worth working through and figuring out. But I would say the biggest problem, if you're going to be in a relationship, the worst thing you can do is be deceitful. So mm-hmm. I don't know why we got off on that topic. I guess because you asked about polyamory, but just don't be deceitful. Whatever you do, don't be deceitful, and be honest with your partner and have honest conversations about what's going on.
Or what's that Jordan Peterson quote? He says, always tell the truth, or at least don't lie. If you can help it, like, always tell the truth, or at least don't lie. I was going to say the reason why, well, from a Christian point of view, it's because it's sin. It's like we are fallen and we live in a fallen world. That's just one perspective. I'm not saying everyone has to believe that, but that it's there's the difference. You know, we are of the flesh. It's that whole idea of it's like a constant struggle. Is that you're struggling against you know, I went to this sermon once at a friend's church. This was more of like a fire and brimstone church. So I only went to one service there, but the preacher gave part of what he said I thought was really interesting. He was talking about it protecting a marriage and being a monogamous relationship, and being aware of your weaknesses of the flesh so that you don't put yourself in situations where setting yourself up to
Mike
fail.
Pence us now?
That actually, it made me think of Mike Pence. Yeah. Because he was saying, you know, I don't go to, because I don't ever want to put myself in a situation, but he's like, yeah, I don't go to dinner with with women who are not my wife without other people being there. Like, I don't go alone. Like, he had certain rules for himself. And I thought, wow, that's a really proactive way, not just about monogamy or just in general. If you know, don't set yourself up for failure, whether you're talking about protecting your marriage or you're talking about any type of
not having Twinkies in the cupboard at home because you've got a susceptibility.
Exactly. Not having Twinkies in the cupboard at home because that's your problem, right? Like, whatever your problem is, don't put yourself in situations where you're going to be tempted, because if you know what your temptations are and what you're capable of, and to know that, you have to be aware of how much evil you're capable of. You can't pretend like you're a good person. All these people pretend like they're good people, and then it's like you're setting up a moral blind spot for what you're actually capable of because you refuse to face that of what you know. Anyway, we're going a little far afield, but that's okay. This is our fun holiday special.
That's okay. I mean, yeah, we can talk about whatever. I guess, you know, I just, with respect to being honest, and this is just my personal experience. So, with respect to being honest, I think in a relationship, it means being honest about stuff that's really uncomfortable to be honest about, and about your emotions. So to give an example, and I know not everyone would agree with this, but if I find someone else attractive, I'm attracted to some woman I meet at work or out on the street or whatever, I tell my wife about it.
It diffuses it.
I was just going to say that it diffuses the tension, because then she can know, we can have a conversation about why, and it's not a failure on my part. It's a natural thing to be attracted to people. So you can have that discussion, and it can become a moment where you bond with your spouse more closely, rather than if you pretend it's not true and cover it up. Then it becomes, now you've kind of got this dirty little secret. And that secret takes on erotic power because secrets are kind of exciting. You've denied your marriage the opportunity to learn from that attraction. So there is a difference. This is one of the differences between, it's actually one of the things I like about Judaism over Christianity, not to get into a religious discussion, but in Judaism, it's my understanding, I'm actually grew up culturally Jewish, but I'm not practicing Jewish. In Judaism, you've committed a sin by the act of something. You've committed a sin by doing something. And in a lot of Christian teachings, you've committed the sin by thinking about it. So, you know, thou shalt not lust after thy neighbor's wife. So, now, granted, that's an Old Testament. So I'm talking not about what's actually written, but what seems to be the practice in the communities, right? I think that giving yourself an order to not feel a certain way is setting yourself up for failure. It's okay to lust after your neighbor's wife. It's not okay to act on the lust after your neighbor's wife. So whenever you pretend that you can control your emotions, you're being irrational. Like, you can't say, don't feel this way, don't have these thoughts, don't get murderously angry. You can say don't murder, but you can't say don't feel this way. And when you say don't feel this way, you will inevitably break that rule, and then you've set yourself up for failure, because you've kind of told your subconscious, well, I know I have these rules, but I've already broken them. So I'm a rule breaker. So I'm like, what's the difference, right? I'm just going to break another rule. I'm already a rule breaker. So, well, I think actually,
can I interject here for a second?
To set yourself up for that. And yeah, tell me if I may be wrong on the.
No,
I'm just reflecting my perspective on Christianity, but
no, but I think you're missing something about the Christian perspective that you actually agree with it, which is you said you tell your wife when you have a thought like that. And that's what diffuses it. See, like there is a verse in the New Testament.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. But that's not the Christian perspective. The Christian perspective is don't feel it. Right? You're wrong for feeling it. Generally.
I don't know.
Maybe modern, or at least Christianity that I grew up with.
Okay, here's my take on it. Now, there's a verse in Matthew, but I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. So that's in the New Testament as well. But the point is, at least when I've heard preachers talk about this recently, and it's only recently that I've been listening to stuff, like, again, my perspective on Christianity is new. But it's about what you said. It's about letting a thought permeate and keep it as a secret to yourself. And you're going to have thoughts like, I hate that person, or I lust after that person. You're going to have immoral thoughts, but there's a difference between having a thought and then like growing a thought, because a thought that you come back to over and over becomes an act, and an act that you do more than once becomes a habit, and a habit becomes an addiction. You have all those things, right? But it starts with a thought. That's why I think Christians that's why I think the Bible focuses on the thought, because without the thought, you don't have the act. You're going to have the thought. Right. It's just like you take actions to not have it in secret over and over and over again by sharing it with your partner, which is,
yeah, I guess, look, I don't want to get into a theological debate about what's the right way to, I'm just, growing up, the Christianity I grew up with was definitely there was self-condemnation for having impure thoughts, and I reject that as a practical method for dealing with the world, because you will have impure thoughts, and if you condemn yourself for having impure thoughts, then people tend to think in very black and white terms. I'm good or I'm bad. Like you tend to. Like if you set up a set of rules that you know you're going to break, then you will start to view yourself as a rule breaker, and it becomes like. But if those sets of rules are, I'm allowed to have these thoughts, but when I have them, these are the things I need to do. I need to make sure that I diffuse them. I need to make sure I don't act on them. Blah, blah, blah. Then you can have those thoughts, follow all the rules, and you haven't broken any rules, and you're still setting yourself up to have a self view as someone who's moral. But if you set the rule up where like only if I do that, if I have that thought, it's immoral. I'm an immoral person for having that thought. I think, and again, this is not a statement about Christianity or any other religion. I think you're setting yourself up for failure, because you will have thoughts about actions, whether it's adultery or murder or whatever, stealing.
But Carter,
you will have thoughts. That
Christians don't say you won't, though. They say you're going to have those thoughts because you're a sinner. Like you're going to have the point is without God's. Okay, but I'm arguing. Wait. Here's what I'm saying. Because we finally get passionate about something. Because without God's moral law, to say that is immoral, this is where we're probably disagreeing. That there would be no reason for you not to have them again and again and keep them secret, right? So you're going to have them, but knowing that you shouldn't dwell in them, like that's the whole point. It's like you shouldn't let it become.
Yeah, I think
we're saying the same thing.
Practical reason why you shouldn't,
right?
But you shouldn't. You don't need God's law. There's a practical reason why you shouldn't. I just described my practical reason. It ruins your marriage. But anyway.
It does.
We don't have to have a theological debate.
No, we don't. But I will say of course, it's a practical reason. See, a lot of times people fuck up. Sorry, again, with the language, people mess up their lives. And then this is what I liked about the Bible is when I started reading it again, I'm like, oh, like it told you some of these things that maybe you should and shouldn't do. Like you didn't have to figure this all out the hard way. Of course, there's practical reasons why this is a moral law. So I think we're in agreement here. I think we're just passionately disagreeing about being in agreement.
I don't know. I'm not sure we are. I think we're still in disagreement about how we view thoughts, whether the thoughts themselves are immoral. And I would argue the thoughts don't make you a bad person. I
don't think so either. Yeah, I would agree.
Oh, okay. Then we're in agreement.
They don't make you a bad person.
Can we talk about something else that's just random? Can we lighten it up for a second?
Yeah.
Because can we talk about Diet Coke and napkins?
Please tell me about it.
I just think this is funny, and it's kind of related to Valentine's Day because it's related to this idea that expressing interest in someone is hurtful and oppressive. And I get, catcalling is rude and stuff. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that you can harass people, but we seem to not have this distinction between harassing someone and hitting on them in an innocent manner in society now. And everything's become like, you're a victim if I say, hey, you're hot, want to go on a date? Like suddenly I'm creepy. And oh my God, you're oppressed. So
a third of millennials say that that's sexual harassment.
Right. Wait, what was that number again? How many millennials?
A third of millennials.
A third of millennials think it's sexual harassment, right? Which is just blows my mind. But so Delta Airlines I think this was last week, they got in trouble because, so you know how you get, you get the little napkins with your peanuts or whatever, Keri, and they're often sponsored by some company. So Delta's napkins are sponsored by Diet Coke. All right. And so they're branded Diet Coke. And so Diet Coke, I guess, launched this campaign, which was all about using the napkins to tell your plane crush, quote, your plane crush, your phone number. And basically, like, so there's a spot to like write your phone number, and it says stuff like, I'm paraphrasing, but it says stuff like, who knows? It could happen. Like, give them your phone number. You give your phone number to your plane crush. You never know. It could happen. And I think it's kind of silly. But yes, people were very upset about the idea that Diet Coke was encouraging you to give your phone number to people and basically hit on them on the flight and hit on your plane crush. I view it as something that was just, so they yanked the napkins, by the way, and there was outrage. I viewed it as something that was kind of innocuous, but I mean, I guess if someone was like persistently then crushing on you and you're sitting next to them, it would be a little bit weird. But I don't know, Keri. I'm not a woman who's likely to get a note on a plane from my plane crush. So, am I wrong? Is this a horribly offensive thing to be doing? Is Diet Coke
when did
misogynistic, toxic masculine company?
No, when did women forget how to decline in advance? Like, it's as if women don't have the ability to say, "Oh, thanks, that's kind," and then like throw the napkin away because they're not actually interested.
I am hot, but I'm not interested in you, so go away.
Or whatever. Like, don't. It's almost there's also this thing in feminist communities because, and this is probably part of what's behind this idea that a third of millennials believe that complimenting someone on their physical appearance is sexual harassment. Is that there's been this attitude in feminist circles of if someone compliments you, you take it in a negative way, and you should get angry about that or something. That all of it is a type of catcalling.
Predatory. Compliments are predatory,
right? And that refuses to acknowledge nuance. Like, I've certainly been in a case where I remember one time in New York, I was walking into a bodega and some guy said something. I didn't even know he was talking to me, so I'm kind of oblivious most of the time. So I didn't say anything back, and I walked in, and then he called me a bitch or something because I didn't respond. That's the type of guy, that's the type of compliment that I absolutely understand why feminists criticize that, because it's a person who's paying you a compliment in order to get something from you. And they're at heart, they're really just don't like you. It's a weird misogyny thing, but they conflate that with all compliments, and that's just not true. And so I know like there's nothing wrong with a person saying, "Hey, I'm into you," and you being like, "That's very flattering, but I'm not like," maybe people are afraid of hurting. I mean, I know I am too. People are afraid of hurting people's feelings. So maybe it stems from that too. They feel like, why am I put in this position where I must hurt feelings?
So they call them misogynists for giving out their phone number.
Well, that's
great
true.
Solution.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think people are too touchy these days. They're too touchy, and it's almost as if they view women as not having agency. Like not able to say no, thank you, or not interested, or I don't know. I think that's silly.
Yeah, it's odd also to me because people like to feel desired, especially women. I don't know, maybe I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but
You're going to get in trouble for saying that.
Women like, generally, in my experience, women like feeling desired. So, and they like being, quote, objects of desire. They like feeling desired. But if you express that desire and that woman happens to be a feminist, you're a misogynist pig. So,
you know who's really hurt by this, Carter, is that one couple who was going to meet this way and get married. And now it's never going to happen. That would have been their story. The Coca-Cola napkins.
They were probably planning on we'll do a follow-up 2 years later to see who met with Coke napkins and
right.
And they're now married and have kids. Yeah. I don't know, Keri. Maybe we should. It is Valentine's Day. I feel like we should loop back to Valentine's Day with a pretty easy question you can just answer for us, which is, what is romantic love? Go.
Oh, wow. That's not an easy question. That's not an easy question at all. I'd have to think about it for a while. I mean, it's what we were talking about as like limerence. I mean, it has physical effects. You have physical like heart racing or short of breath, like that kind of stuff. But that's just like the beginning. Romantic love. Yeah, that's more, yeah. But the word romantic. Do you mean like long-term monogamous love, or do you mean like the beginning, or what? I don't know.
Well, I mean romantic love as opposed to filial love, or
okay,
love of pizza, or like, I mean, romantic sexual love. What is romantic love?
I think it's that special type of love that you have for a partner, for someone that you're going to share your life with. That is I know I bring him up a lot, but one thing that Peterson said that I really liked was he said, marriage should be an agreement where two people agree to show the worst parts of themselves to each other and not run away screaming. Like marriage should be, or romantic love, that partnership should be the place where you feel secure to be completely honest about who you are with all of your shortcomings and failings with each other, and to support each other, and to know the worst in each other and to still love each other because you see the best, and to help each other be the best version of yourself. And you can't spend that type of intimacy with everyone, you know, and I personally believe it works best with one person. It doesn't mean other people can't do what they want or try what they want. It's just I mean, there are biological reasons as well why, like you said, about child rearing and stuff, why we are driven to pair bond, if you will. What is your answer? What is romantic love? It's not chocolates and flowers.
No, I think I mean, fundamentally, and I didn't invent this, but I think romantic love is fundamentally, I think it's a response to values that you see in another person that you admire, and it has to be mixed with sexual desire for it to be romantic love. But it's a response to values, and which is why I think shared values are very important for a long-term relationship. It doesn't mean you have to agree on everything, but you know, I know a lot of people would argue that people with two different religions can be married and happy, and I'm sure there are people of two different religions that are married and happy. But I would argue that neither one of them can be taking their religion seriously and that be true. Because if your fundamental view of the universe is opposed by your significant other, I think it's a barrier to growing together and really knowing each other. I think you can disagree on lots of things, but I think without those shared values, I think it's difficult. But yeah, in a summary, there's a book I think called It's called The Psychology of Romantic Love by another therapist of mine at one point. I'm TMIing everyone. I had too many therapists in my life. Let me look up The Psychology of, I think this is the name of it, Romantic Love. Yeah, it's called The Psychology of Romantic Love by Nathaniel Branden. I do recommend it. It's a good book about romantic love. Good Valentine's Day book. Especially if you're single and you're looking. In case anyone that you know might.
It is funny the thing about values and religions, because I'm a very different person than I was a couple years ago, or even from a year ago, a very different person. And so my boyfriend and I just broke up because, well, we both have a very good sense of humor about it, but essentially I left him for Jesus because he's not a Christian. That's part of it. But he's doing some stand-up, and we were writing some jokes together where he's doing some stand-up about if he finds this Jesus guy, but but then it turns out there's a song. We looked it up. There's actually a song called "She Left Me for Jesus." It's a country song. It's not
by Eric Cartman, is it? Because I feel like there's probably one of those too.
No, it's a country song. It might be Hayes Carl. Yeah. Anyway, look it up. She left me for Jesus, and if I ever find Jesus, I'm kicking his butt.
Yeah. There's a.
I don't know. I think it's hard. I think it is hard to have two different fundamentally different belief systems.
Yeah. So before we end, I want to end soon, but before we end, there's actually one other thing I want to loop back to. We talked about some examples of how the left and the social justice culture is kind of, I would say, anti-love. I mean, we didn't get into this too much, but they would much rather you have random dates on Twitter than that you settle down and have a monogamous, happy relationship with kids. And a lot of this is coming from the rad femmes, like the radical feminists side of things. I want to talk about why they're doing that and the effects it's had. Because Keri and I, you were talking before the show a little bit. Women are not happier. Women have been told for decades that they were, I think I read some quotes from Margaret Small from the 70s, right? The relationship of wife to husband was one of slavery. They've been told basically that, sex is some sort of rape. Heterosexuality is about male supremacy and patriarchy. They've been told that they are in bondage by being housewives, if that's what they choose to do, and be home with the kids. And so they've been told that for decades, and women have entered the workforce. I got some stats somewhere I can pull up, but there's been moms are in the workforce a lot more than they were, 40, 50 years ago. And parent and dads are helping around the house a lot more, and there's a lot more quote equality in terms of that. The pay gap, which I would argue is a myth anyway, and I think there's a lot of evidence for that being a myth generally. But even the mythical pay gap has shrunk, and yet, female happiness is
on the decline.
In fact, there's a. See if I can even pull up this article. Sorry, here it is. There is now this is from a couple of years ago, or maybe 10 years ago. But there's a paper, The Paradox of Declining Female Happiness. And let me just read the abstract of it and we'll be done. By many objective measures, the lives of women in the United States have improved over the past 35 years. Yet we show that measures of subjective well-being indicate that women's happiness has declined both absolutely and relative to men. The paradox of women's declining relative well-being is found across various data sets, measures of subjective well-being, and is pervasive across demographic groups and industrialized countries. Relative declines in female happiness have eroded a gender gap in happiness in which women in the 1970s typically reported higher subjective well-being than did men. These declines have continued, and a new gender gap is emerging, one with higher subjective well-being for men. So after all of this feminism, we are at a place where women are less happy. And actually, if you look up stats, families are more broken. There's more single parenthood. There's more out of wedlock births. There's just, everything is kind of worse now after following the advice of the radical feminists.
Yeah.
Why is that, Keri?
Camille Paglia talks about this. I think if people aren't familiar with her, they should look up some of her lectures. And she's a feminist, but she is critical of. Let's say she's aware of some of the repercussions of the changes that have happened in society, and so she talks a lot about how when things were more divided into the female and male sphere, you had women coming together with other women more often, like doing the laundry together, cooking together, cleaning together. It was more of a communal society. And then you had the men, like after dinner, the women would do the dishes together and talk, and the men would go out and tinker with cars and have this, male camaraderie together. But because we've kind of gotten rid of those separate spheres, and we've sort of said women need to be everything and men need to be everything, I think that there's a lot of is a burden on people to do all of it, to have a career and to come home and raise the kids and to do the housework. A lot of my friends who are in marriages that I would say they are like feminist or egalitarian, there's this constant complaining about how the husband doesn't help enough at home with the housework, and they're both working. And so it's like, but he's not pulling his weight at home. And it used to be that one person didn't have to do all of that. It was divided. Now, I'm not saying that that's, again, just like talking about normal and abnormal. It doesn't mean that one is superior, that's ideal. It's just that it didn't used to be that you had to do everything. And so now I think, yeah, women are unhappy because there's not enough hours in the day to do all of that. And so the idea that you've got two parents in the home who are working at least 8-hour shifts and then coming home and trying to cook and do homework and clean. And it just, I don't know how people make that work. I don't. And I understand, there's a book that came out in the 50s, Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique. This is a really popular book in women's studies. And it kind of talked about the problem that has no name, about this malaise, this unhappiness that housewives felt. And the whole book is kind of about that. Well, not to say that those women were not unhappy, but women today are unhappier than they were then. So maybe what we tried didn't work. Like maybe you start off here and we can look at the effects. A lot of times feminists or SJWs don't look at the effects of things really. And it's just all about the idea of what they're trying to do. They don't actually look to see the practical fallout of it. And so to look around and say women are unhappy, you know what their answer would be? Well, women are unhappy. That's because
their goal wasn't actually for that. Like that, if they don't look at the results, it's just the goal was never their goal. Their goal is something else.
Probably.
Sorry, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
No, I mean, I know what they would say is that the women are unhappier today because men aren't doing their fair share of housework, or, they would find a way to bring it back to men.
But that's contradicted by the data. Mm-hmm. That's contradicted by the data. So we're definitely closer to the feminist utopia now than we were in the 50s and in the 70s. So
to close this out before we go, I was reading about Hungary. So Hungary, like a lot of the West, has seen declining birth rates. And so they just instituted a policy, the prime minister, where to boost the birth rate and to support families, where if you have 4 or more kids in a marriage, the woman won't pay any income tax for life. And there are other incentives, like every woman under 40 will be eligible for a preferential loan when she first gets married. And then they have subsidies for large families to buy larger cars. And so the whole idea is to try and see our system in the US. I'm starting to see we incentivize single parent homes because you get punished if you're on welfare. Think? Yeah, it took me a while as a feminist to believe.
You're just now starting to see that, huh, Keri?
It's true, because when you're in the other echo chamber, you don't believe that at all. You just see all the stuff that says, no, that's all a lie. But yeah, so women get, if you're a liberal and you're watching this, women get punished. Like if you don't get as much money, or if you're on welfare and a man is in the house, it doesn't benefit you to have a man in the house. So, so Hungary's doing the opposite, though. They're trying to support families staying together. And so they said the support has caused, so here's some of the results. Let's talk about results. The support has caused abortion numbers to plunge by more than a third of what they were in 2010. It used to be 40,000 a year, and now they're 28,000. It's also caused a plunge in the number of divorces. It used to be 23,000, now it's 18,000. And a surge in the number of marriages. It used to be 35,000, and now it's up to 50,000. And I just think that's that's a different approach than what we're taking here in the States. Like, instead of doing incentives for being in single parent homes, like incentives for families to stay together. Hey, maybe that's a good idea. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's, I think there's a bunch of cynical reasons why I think we wouldn't want it. We don't do that, but yeah, absolutely. So I'll say one thing before we wrap it up, but if anyone's got stuff that they want us to address that we haven't addressed, just let us know in the chat here. And we'll try and touch on it before we wrap up. But crap, I lost my train of thought, Keri. It's one of those days. I was going to say something about
it's the Benadryl.
Family and marriage. It's probably the Benadryl. But
I'm sure it was great.
Okay. It was a brilliant thing, and you were very impressed by whatever it was. Oh, well, I'll just say this. Look, there are some great things that feminism did. Feminism telling women that they could go have careers, and they could go compete in the workforce if they wanted to. I think few people would argue that that was a great thing for feminism to tell women. That they don't have to stay in abusive relationships, and other great things. So there's some great things that feminism told women. They should be equal before the law, right? Lots of great things came from the feminists. But likewise, I think one of the most destructive things has come from the feminists, and that is it's actually weird, given the Margaret Small essay that I read excerpts of earlier, where she believes that like women are the creators of all things because they give birth. Feminists told women that being home and raising children and taking care of the household was less worthy of respect than being a lawyer or doing whatever it was that the man was out doing and earning money. And that's a vicious lie. And a lot of women that I know, even if they are great in their career, when they have children, if they can afford it as a family, they would much rather stay home, and they're much happier staying home. They often have this sense of guilt placed in their subconscious, I think, by feminism. Like, oh, shouldn't I go have a career? I should go have a career, right? I should be having my career. And I think it's caused us as a society to devalue mothers. And look, I can rail against a lot of things that moms do, and I know we each have our own personal relationships with our own mothers, but the role of being a mom and raising responsible, healthy, well-adjusted the kids, that we're raising the next generation, taking care of the home domestically while the dad is out earning money. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be the reverse. It could be, there's other ways to be. I'm not saying this is the only way it has to be, but that is worthy of our respect and admiration. And I think a lot of women feel like if they, at least in Western society, they feel like if they choose that, they're somehow less than the high-powered lawyer woman who chose a career and throws her kids in daycare, which, by the way, is horrible for the children, and she's a bad mom. I'll say it right away. You're bad parents if that's what you do. And it's sad because I think it's not only hurt women, it's hurt generations of kids and is can continue to. And again, it doesn't have to be the mom that stays home, but it is, it is what a lot of women would prefer to do, and they feel guilty about it, and they feel like they can't do it because it's not the feminist thing to do. It's not powerful and strong and independent. And the purpose of being in a marriage and having kids is to be dependent, right? One person's dependent on the other person to take care of the family and make it run smoothly and allocate resources properly and make sure the children are raised well. And the other person is dependent on the income that allows them to do that. And, that's not, there's nothing wrong with that. And again, it doesn't have to be the guy out working and the woman at home, but it's the way a lot of people want to do it. And they get shamed for it, I guess. You hear the phrase like, "Oh, I'm only a housewife. I'm only a homemaker." And it's sad. That's my rant, Keri. Keri's gone away. We can't hear Keri. Laura in chat says, "The best thing I ever did was raising my son, hands down." You go, Laura. And I think there needs to be more credit given to people like you, because it's vital, and a lot of women are not raising their children well, and their children are growing up to be horrible people. So, Keri,
Carter,
I hear something in my ear. Are you
now?
back or no? Yeah, you're back. All right. Good.
Okay. Well, you're choppy, so I only heard part of that. I'm sorry. Something happened.
Well, I'm not going to repeat it because it probably wasn't that great anyway, because I'm on Benadryl.
I'm sure it was great.
And we'll hope it wasn't choppy for everyone. We'll hope it was just you. But it's probably time for us to wrap up. Any last words, Keri?
I can't.
No last words. You're giving me the choppy signal. Okay. Thank you all for watching, listening. Hopefully this isn't a mess of choppy words. Hopefully you can understand me. So thank you all for watching. You can go to unsafespace.co, not .com, unsafespace.co. There's no M because the M stands for Marxism, and we don't like Marxism. So please go to unsafespace.co, support the show. You can follow us on Twitter at unsafespaceco, and you can go to YouTube, and we're Unsafe Space on YouTube. This show is Deprogrammed. It happens every week at 11 with me and Keri. Every Thursday at 11 with me and the bad Mama Jamma, Keri Smith. So thanks all for watching. Happy Valentine's Day. Sorry that I'm hopped up on Benadryl and drugged out today. Hey, there's Keri. She's back. And we will see you next week.
Bye, guys.